everyone. Good. We have a great night last night, no? Charity, dinner, beautiful. I think I'm very happy with what is all around this Fashion Week Miami, no? Because we have the charity dinner, thinking about who those kids who need a lot from us, and then this space that we give the opportunity to know a lot about people who see fashion in a different way, no? I think that we already make a lot of mistakes, and now thanks to all of you that inspire us to see, the world in a different way, and to see that we have to change many things, but we are in the right way. So today we have other three amazing speakers, and we're gonna start with this lady who came from London. She's the founder of Fashion Revolution. Fashion Revolution has become the world's largest fashion baptism campaign with teams in over 100 countries. In 1992, Carrie set up her multi-award-winning fashion brand, Pacha Cutie. The Progress 1000 Award named her one of the top 1,000 more influential people in London. Please welcome Carrie Sommers.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. At Fashion Revolution, we believe that transparency is the first step towards transforming the fashion industry. And this is why we're asking the question, who made my clothes? The journeys made by our clothes remain in large part invisible. They may have begun life in the countryside, in the cotton fields that we can see here, and then travelled across a vast network in many countries through the hands of hundreds of workers working for dozens of different companies before they arrive in our wardrobes. The Rana Plaza factory collapse in Bangladesh in 2013 was inevitable. There are ever longer supply chains and a resulting shift in responsibility. And what happened really reflects a global trend of increased demand, which feeds the fast fashion supply chain. Since 1990, at least 2,200 Bangladeshi garment workers have been killed in 300 separate safety incidents, and yet calls for improvements have gone unheeded, both by the government and by the brands. Rana Plaza was built originally in 2006. Originally, it was a 6-storey building. It was poorly constructed, and it was built on a drained swamp. The original building didn't have the proper permits. The 2 floors added later on were illegal, and at the time of the collapse, a 9th floor was under construction. And yet all of this went either undetected or ignored by the Western brands who had repeatedly audited the factories within that factory complex. And after the disaster, it took many brands several weeks to work out what the relationship was with the brands who operated there. And the campaigners had to physically search through the rubble to find the labels to prove which brands were producing there. And that's when it became apparent that the workers who make our clothes were invisible and that this lack of transparency was costing lives. In the aftermath of the Rana Plaza factory collapse, everywhere I looked, there were newspaper articles calling for a more ethical fashion industry. I knew that we needed to find a way to channel this concern into a long-standing campaign so that the victims of Rana Plaza and all of the other workers who have died in the name of fashion would never be forgotten. It was clear that the fashion industry needed revolutionary change, and that's when Fashion Revolution was born. 5 years on, Fashion Revolution has become the world's biggest fashion activism movement, with teams in 100 countries around the world, including here in the United States. Some members of the team are here in the audience today. We are a positive and collaborative platform. We work with citizens, policymakers, unions, NGOs, brands and retailers. And we aim to showcase best practice initiatives. You've heard about many of those initiatives here during the 3 days of the summit. And we advocate for greater transparency and social and environmental responsibility within the fashion supply chain. And 5 years on from Rana Plaza, a fashion revolution is still needed because people and the environment continue to suffer as a result of the way in which fashion is made, sourced and consumed. We need far greater visibility of the people working in supply chains, the people who sew, weave, dye, spin the yarn or grow the raw materials for the clothes which we wear every day. According to Benjamin Hertzberg of the World Bank, transparency is the new power because it helps companies reduce costs and better manage risk. Open and collaborative private sector practices are a true win-win. They impact the bottom line and they correlate with governance, environmental and social gains. So why, despite some positive progress in Bangladesh over the past 5 years, does the fashion industry, on the whole, remain so secretive? I just want to rewind a few decades here and give you some background to what I was doing before I founded Fashion Revolution in 2013. Since 1992, I had been working with artisans in the Andes, primarily in the design and production of Panama hats and headpieces for my fashion brand, Pachacuti. Any of you who looked at my Instagram feed will have seen several members of my family at Buckingham Palace 2 days ago wearing a variety of our different hats and headpieces. My designs were sold at London, Paris and Milan Fashion Week and sold in some of the most high-end luxury boutiques around the world. But Pachacuti was also a pioneer of radical transparency in the fashion supply chain, as well as becoming the first company in the world to be Fair Trade certified by the World Fair Trade Organization. We worked for 3 years as a pilot for the European Union's Geo Fair Trade project, and this brought about an unprecedented level of traceability to our supply chain. The project aimed to provide visible accountability of sustainable provenance, both for the production processes and for the raw materials. And despite the remoteness and inaccessibility of the region where our Panama hats are woven, we traced the production back to 154 of our weavers' houses to the very precise GPS coordinates where they were located. And this isn't an easy job because the weavers are located high in the Andes. Actually, only 45% of their homes are accessible by road. But Patch Cooties weavers are delighted that this research data helps to correct a historical misnomer, and people can now trace their Panama hats back to the country of origin, Ecuador. But it doesn't stop there. We then trace the straw back to the communities on the coast of Ecuador where it is processed. And then next, a bumpy hour by truck from the nearest paved road. We mapped the GPS coordinates of each plot of land in the coastal cloud forest where the straw is harvested on community-owned plantations. I love the fact that these men who spend their entire day wielding machetes are known as the Asociación de Paz y Amor, the Love and Peace Association. Our work on the EU Geo-Fair Trade project also involved the collection of 68 different social, economic and environmental indicators. And this enabled us to track our progress, our fair trade progress and our impact across the 3 years. So we could tell whether our policies and procedures were really making a difference on the lives of the artisans, on their families, on whether their children were more able to go to school, on their literacy rates, on their access to medical care and issues like this. So although I no longer work at Patch Cootie on a daily basis now, I know from experience that there is a better way to do business. So how did we come to this in the rest of the industry? The global fashion industry is opaque, exploitative and environmentally damaging, and it desperately needs revolutionary change. Despite some progress since the Rana Plaza collapse, we still have a long way to go until everyone who makes our clothes can live and work with dignity without fear of losing their life. But so much still remains hidden within the fashion supply chain, largely due to its scale and complexity. And we still have no way of knowing, we still don't really know how it all really works. And we know that worker exploitation thrives in hidden places. And basically, if you can't see it, you can't fix it. And workers can suffer exploitation anywhere in the world. Just last week in the Financial Times, they uncovered issues which were already known within the United Kingdom. In Leicester, where a lot of clothes are made, workers were being paid less than half of the legal minimum wage. They had no access to unions, they had no contracts with their employers either. For Fashion Revolution, transparency means the public disclosure of credible, comprehensive and comparable data and information about supply chains, business practices and the impact of these practices on workers, communities and the environment. Transparent disclosure makes it easier for all of the relevant parties to understand what went wrong, who is responsible and how to fix it. We believe that transparency will lead to accountability, which will eventually lead to a change in the way in which business is done. But transparency is a means to change. It's not the end game. Ultimately, Fashion Revolution believes that the whole of the fashion industry needs a radical paradigm shift and that the way in which we produce and consume clothing will need to change. This means that business models need to change and the multiplicity of solutions will be required. Transparency alone doesn't represent the sort of structural, systemic change that we want to see within the fashion industry. What it does do is it helps to reveal the structures which are in place so that we can better understand how to change them. The third edition of Fashion Revolution's Fashion Transparency Index was launched in April, and it ranks 150 of the world's biggest fashion brands and retailers according to their level of transparency. The Fashion Transparency Index measures how much information brands disclose about their suppliers, supply chain policies and practices, and their social and environmental impacts. 5 key areas were assessed: policy and commitments, governance, traceability, no-show fix, which looks at any problems in the supply chain and how the brands are working to fix them, and spotlight issues, which this year looked at women, workers and waste. The 150 fashion brands who are covered in the index this year really have the potential to improve millions of lives around the world. And transparency is the first step in this journey towards making this a reality. So what do the results show us? In short, we still don't know enough about the impact our clothing has on people and on the planet. No brand scored higher than 60%. 10 brands scored in the 51 to 60% category, with Adidas, Reebok, Puma and H&M leading the field. A third of brands and retailers scored 10% or less, and 12 brands and retailers scored 0%. This means they really reveal a very limited number of policies and procedures, or in the case of those that scored 0, they reveal nothing at all on their website. This was just a 1% increase on the average score last year. However, the original brands which were reviewed last year when we reviewed 100 brands and who were again reviewed this year showed a 5% overall improvement in transparency levels across each section of the methodology. And this highlights how the Fashion Transparency Index is influencing brands to disclose more information. And we really hope to see this trend continue year on year. In the previous 2 years of conducting this research, we noted that the luxury brands were really disclosing a lot less than other major high street brands, but we're starting to see this trend change as well. This year, Bottega Veneta, Burberry, Calvin Klein, Gucci, Hugo Boss, Tommy Hilfiger and Yves Saint Laurent all scored within the 31 to 40% range, and their average increases were between 7 and 11% on last year's score. So we're really hopeful to see the luxury industry continue to up their game as well. In terms of traceability, 37% of the brands and retailers are now publishing a list of where their clothes are cut, sewn and completed. This is up from 12.5% 2 years ago. And this is something which Fashion Revolution, along with a lot of other organisations, have been pushing for. And it represents the most significant and positive increase in transparency. When companies publish information about their supply chains, it helps NGOs, unions, communities, and even the workers themselves to more swiftly alert the brands to human rights and environmental issues. It can also help the companies to keep track of any unauthorised suppliers who are being used to make its product, and it makes it easier to manage the risks which might lead to human rights and environmental abuses, which could eventually damage the company's reputation. Brands who don't disclose their supply chains are withholding a critical tool that can promote workers' rights. Whilst we're seeing brands begin to publish more about their social and environmental efforts, which is welcome and necessary, there's still so much crucial information which remains concealed about the practices of the fashion industry, particularly when it comes to brands' tangible impact on the lives of the workers in the supply chain and on the environment. Brands are now scoring relatively well, very well, for disclosing their policies and their commitments. But they're scoring much fewer points when you really drive down into detail about how their policies are actually put into practice. Only 55% of brands and retailers are publishing measurable, time-bound goals on improving their environmental impacts, and only 37% of brands are publishing their goals on improving their human rights impact. And only around half of brands are actually disclosing the progress they're making towards achieving these goals on a yearly basis. This is why we need universal, industry-wide accountability standards, because at present, despite the growing number of transparency tools and apps which are coming onto the market, we still really have no way of knowing whether brands' policies and procedures are truly effective. Are they really driving progress for the people who are making our clothes? Beyond the people who sew and finish our clothes, which is known as the Tier 1 facilities, most brands have very marginal positive impact on the lowest levels of their supply chain. This year's index found that just one brand, ASOS, was disclosing its raw material suppliers. Last year, nobody was disclosing their raw material suppliers. And just 18% of brands, up from 14% last year, were disclosing their processing facilities. Home workers, part-time workers, and other workers who make up the informal economy are largely ignored when it comes to fashion brands' assessments, disclosure, and reporting. Many factories in Bangladesh, in particular the unregulated factories where most of the subcontracting takes place, as well as home workers, fall out of the scope of the Bangladesh Accord and Alliance. It's been estimated that 3 million garment workers in Bangladesh, some of the most vulnerable workers in the supply chain, aren't covered by these audits. In November, I visited the factories in Bangladesh. The government has moved the tanneries from the Hazaribagh district to the Savar district in Bangladesh in an attempt to improve particular environmental impact. But really, the conditions I saw were shocking. I was told that only 5 to 10% of the tanneries and footwear factories have adequate working conditions. Young workers were prevalent in the tanneries. Health and safety issues were evident. No protective clothing was being worn. The environmental pollution was everywhere. The central effluent plant wasn't yet functional, and the effluent was just going out into the drainage ditches behind all of the food stalls and going out into the river where there's endangered species like the Bangladeshi river dolphin, which are still just about holding on. There was animal tails just lying around on the tracks outside the factories. And I was told that brands never visit the tanneries. The workers beyond these first-tier factories, home workers, subcontractors, farmers, have very little bargaining power because they have such indirect relationships with the brands. According to Industrial Global Union, over 90% of workers within the global fashion industry have no possibility to negotiate their wages and their conditions. And we really need to see brands do more to positively affect the lower reaches of their supply chain. Each year we choose different spotlight issues, and this year we looked at how brands and retailers are tackling gender-based discrimination and violence in supply chains, supporting gender equality and promoting female empowerment, both within their own companies and in their supply chains. Slogan T-shirts with female empowerment messages are everywhere, from the We Should All Be Feminist T-shirt on the catwalk at Dior to the pages of most fashion magazines, particularly around times such as the International Women's Day. But the reality is that the fashion industry doesn't empower the majority of women who work in it. Gender-based inequality remains a problem throughout the fashion industry, from the highest levels of management to the shop floor and the factory floor. In the UK, in April, brands have had to reveal the gender pay gap within the management and within their companies, and the results have been quite shocking. About 75 million people work directly in the fashion and textiles industry, and about 80% of them are women. Slogan T-shirts can be empowering, but shouldn't they also empower the women who make our clothes? Last year, one of the main projects we worked on was the Garment Worker Diaries. On-the-ground research partners met with 540 garment workers in India, Cambodia and Bangladesh over the course of 12 months to learn the intimate details of these workers' lives. It was shocking to hear that 40% of these workers had actually seen a fire in their place of work. But in terms of women's issues, 60% of them reported gender-based discrimination over the 12 months. Over 15% reported being threatened and 5% had been hit. But when I met with the president of the Bangladeshi Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association, he told me to my face that sexual harassment doesn't exist in garment factories in Bangladesh. Brands need to do more than sell empowering T-shirts. They need to make sure that their policies are put into practice, and not just in the visible places like the fashion shoots in their shops and in their headquarters, but also throughout their supply chains. The people making our clothes may not always be visible, but the clothes, every garment they make has a silent "me too" woven into the seams. It's very clear that we need to do much more to speed up the pace of change, and we believe that there's two main ways to do this, through legislation and through consumer pressure. Greater regulation is definitely key to levelling the playing field and getting those laggards to move, particularly the bottom 30% of brands. Legally required due diligence and reporting is already starting to happen in France, Switzerland. It's being discussed at EU level. The California Transparency and Supply Chains Act and the UK Modern Slavery Act have both been instrumental in obliging brands to disclose more information about their supply chain activities. Brands and retailers should be legally required to disclose supplier lists for the first tier and beyond, and social and environmental information using a common framework. A common framework will help to highlight both best practices and areas for improvement, and it will help brands themselves and their customers to see how they compare with the rest of the industry. Without legislation, brands will continue to publish willingly only selected information and in whatever format they determine is best. In Fashion Revolution's first fanzine, sorry, jumping back too fast through here now. In Fashion Revolution's first fanzine, Money, Fashion, Power, which you can access online, there's a postcard you can send to a policymaker to ask what they're doing to address these issues. The other way to speed up the pace of change is through consumer pressure. We have the right to know that our money is not supporting exploitation, human rights abuses and environmental destruction, but there's no way to hold brands and retailers to account if we can't see what is truly happening behind the scenes. Fashion Revolution Week takes place in April each year on the week of the anniversary of the Rana Plaza collapse, but the revolution continues all year round. About 2.5 million people engaged with Fashion Revolution last year, and we encourage everybody to show their label and ask the question, who made my clothes? We need to let brands know that we want them to become more transparent about where and how their clothes are made. Sorry, I seem to have gone ahead of myself on the pictures. I was told by one industry insider that for every one person asking the question, who made my clothes, they were taking this as representing 10,000 people who felt the same way but couldn't be bothered to do anything about it. And I think this shows the incredible power that we have as consumers. Every year, more and more people are asking the question, who made my clothes? And more brands are responding. Brands are starting to tell us the stories about their makers and materials and showing us where our clothes are made and who made them, using the hashtag, #IMadeYourClothes. Gildan, Zara, G-Star Raw, Fat Face and Monsoon are among over 4,000 fashion brands and retailers that responded with photographs and information about their workers in April. We believe that the growing number of citizens around the world asking the question, who made my clothes, will encourage greater transparency, and this in turn will improve the lives of workers in the fashion supply chain. By asking the question, who made my clothes, we're applying pressure in the form of a perfectly reasonable question, which brands and retailers really should be able to answer. But brands' PR strategies very rarely acknowledge that the clothes that they sell have been made by people working thousands of miles away. It was very encouraging to see Fat Face, a major UK chain, having photographs of their workers holding up "I Made Your Clothes" posters around Christmas time in all of their retail stores in the UK last year. So this is what we're asking brands to do. We're asking them to publicly acknowledge the people who make their clothes. Answering the question, who made my clothes, requires transparency. And this implies honesty, openness, communication and accountability. And this information needs to be made available to the consumer in a way in which it will start to rebuild public trust in the fashion industry. Brands and retailers must take responsibility for the communities on which their business depends. Most are still operating in broadly the same way that enabled the Rana Plaza factory to collapse in the first place. It's clear that not enough has changed, and change is not happening fast enough. Tragedies like Rana Plaza are eminently preventable, but they will continue to happen until every stakeholder in the fashion supply chain takes responsibility for their actions and their impacts. As well as addressing transparency, Fashion Revolution is also working to change consumer behaviour. Over the past 20 years, we've seen a growing disconnect between our purchasing of new clothes and our responsibility for their social and environmental impact. Our latest fanzine is called Loved Clothes Last, and it addresses the issue of clothing waste. In the Fashion Transparency Index, while a few brands are reporting initiatives to collect, recycle and donate used clothing, overall brands disclose very little to address the problem of overconsumption. Only 6% of brands are promoting repair services to extend the life of their products. 18% of brands describe what they do with unwanted samples, unsold and defective stock. And currently just 1/4 of brands are disclosing their investment in circular resources with the aim of keeping the materials out of landfill. Earlier this year, 142 brands, representing about 7.5% of the global fashion market, signed the Global Fashion Agenda's Circular Fashion System commitment, which sets out 4 key targets to increase textile recycling by 2020. But overall, brands are doing very little in this respect, so this is why we need to educate consumers as to how you can fill your wardrobes in a more responsible way. Fashion Revolution encourages people to take part in the Alternative campaign. Instead of a YouTube haul where someone makes a video about the cheap clothes they've bought and puts it on YouTube, the Alternative shows fashion lovers ways in which they can get new outfits without necessarily buying new clothes, such as DIY, swapping, I love vintage clothes, buying second-hand. Last year, our Alternative campaign included high-profile vloggers such as Cutie Pie Marzio and La Madeleine, who did an online clothes swap. Our Alternative videos have had millions of views online, so I encourage you to check them out. Last year, we also launched the Fashion Revolution Love Story. We love fashion. We love how clothes can make us feel. They're a message to the world about who we are. And we ask people to fall back in love with the things that you already own. The more we love our clothes, the more we care for them, the longer they will last. Share a story, make a video, or write a love letter about an item of clothing which means a lot to you. It's going to be a long journey towards a different industry model, requiring many incremental but necessary steps to turn the tide of fast fashion and other unsustainable business models. We believe the first step is greater transparency, and this will involve citizens, governments, brands and retailers all taking action. We reshape the fashion industry, the lives of its workers, its suppliers, its resources, every time we buy or dispose of an item of clothing. We reshape the fashion industry every time we find out stories about our clothes, talk about them with others, and share these stories online. We reshape the fashion industry every time we ask the question, who made my clothes? And brands and retailers help to reshape the fashion industry every time they answer this question. What we think, what we do, and what we say changes fashion. We can all be fashion revolutionaries. Thank you very much.
Hola, hola. Wow. Well done. I like to be part of the revolution, fashion revolution.
Yes, revolution seems like it's very much on trend now, but it needs to be a lot more than a trend, the revolution. It involves a lot of hard work as well.
But it means like to see to have a passion for, see what I want to change and then take a part of, like hands to work, no? Como ponerse a trabajar.
Yes, and I think that's where Fashion Revolution has been really successful, is it tapped into that sort of feeling of powerlessness people felt after Rana Plaza and gave them really accessible tools to be a part of a change, and really sort of fashionable tools. I think, we've used the industry, the language of the industry, the visuals of the industry. We haven't been very campaigny. We don't come from a campaign background. We all come from the fashion industry. We love fashion. We just want to see fashion being made in a better way.
Great. Bueno, do we have any questions for Carrie? Yes, please.
Hello, Ms. Somers. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. Appreciate it. It was amazing and inspiring. I want to ask, as a student myself in sustainability, that do you believe that, from the latest Green Biz report for 2018, ESG reporting being the top trend for 2018, that can bring those transparency index numbers up for 2018?
I think transparency, I think the numbers will go up every year, but it's going to be incremental. I think when Rana Plaza factory collapsed and brands didn't acknowledge they were making their clothes in that factory, a lot of people thought they were just playing for time. That wasn't the case. The brands really didn't know what their relationship was. So it's not a fast process, and a lot of brands and retailers apparently still don't even know all of their first-tier factories. So the reason that a lot of them are not disclosing this information is not that they don't want to publish. For a lot of them, they still don't know it. So it is going to take time. We aren't going to suddenly see transparency happen overnight. It is going to be incremental. But what we are seeing working really well is this sense of competition. We're having people, luxury brands, calling us up saying, well, actually, how did Hermès get such a good score last year? What are Hermès doing that we're not doing? How can we get a better score? And this is what we need. Brands are quite competitive. And so
Absolutely.
I think that's what's going to really push them, is they want to get higher scores, not just in the Fashion Transparency Index, but in all of these indices. And I think we will see improvements through the different reports and indices.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And then I want to ask the next question, that we see the carbon taxes, they will be soon coming. They're in the pipeline in less than 10 years. Companies, like bigger companies, they'll be required to report their carbon taxes. Do you think if that comes in, fashion industry might see a change? It might. I do believe it might see a change in the environmental side. But it wants me to ask you this question. How about the social impact? How do we quantify the social impacts, especially in the supply chain? That's the biggest challenge that we have. How do we find a tool to quantify those numbers and then bring it up and then make the companies who are responsible for those, make them, transparent, make sure that they kind of put it out there in their annual reports?
Yes, and that's why I said we need legislation, because brands are reporting on the environmental side because it's good for their shareholders. If they're putting solar panels on all of their factories, all of their facilities, their headquarters, their retail stores, increasingly brands are going, very green. A lot of them are talking about their, recycling coat hangers. Isn't that just a complete no-brainer that you don't dispose of every coat hanger for every single garment you sell? But this is also cutting costs for them. So it's beneficial to their shareholders, whereas the social impact isn't necessarily cutting costs, and it can actually be very, very expensive to be doing a lot of the remediation of the factories. And the brands are not putting their money into the social impact. When I was in Bangladesh, I heard that the factories there are receiving between 3 to 5% less every year for the garments they're producing for the major brands. And yet the factories are expected to do all of this remediation to bring their factories up to standard. We can't continue like this. You know,
Absolutely.
the brands really have to put more money into making the factories safe and into their social impact, not just into the environmental side.
We need to quantify the numbers and bring it out. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Do you have any other question? Please. Here.
Hi, thank you. Just wanted to know, what changes have you seen personally from the moment that you came up with the idea of Fashion Revolution to now, 5 years later? What has been your experience with that?
Ooh, I've definitely seen a sea change within the industry. You know, I was talking earlier on about how with Patrick, when we did all our transparency work, you know, it took us 6 months to collect those GPS coordinates. We did a huge amount of work, and then we had a transparency web page on our website. Nobody looked at it. No one looked at it. Nobody was really interested. No one understood the value of transparency. And for me, when Rana Plaza collapsed, you know, I was a bit like, well, actually, now people are going to realise all of, you know, why we put so much work, why I've been banging on about transparency for years and years, and no one's thought it's important. So I think, you know, transparency has become so mainstream. It's good for investment. You know, investors are looking at how transparent brands are in order to work out how to invest, you know, whether to invest in those companies now, because they know it's good for managing risk. So transparency has become, you know, it's become not just good for business, it's become fundamental for business. I think that's the main change I've seen. It doesn't mean that the levels of transparency are necessarily increasing, as I was saying, fast enough, but people know that transparency, it's, you know, it's coming at them whether they like it or not.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a designer of a brand from here in Miami, and Fashion Revolution has been a great inspiration for us. We've been working for 3 years, and you know, like little by little, we've been learning and trying to, you know, incorporate all the transparency, working with the artisans and all that. But right now, we're collecting, recycling, like all of that. We're trying to do that. But right now, we're in a point that we want to go more towards the activism side, and we were talking about it yesterday, and it's really hard with so many things, you know, to fight for. So hard to pick one cause that will be important here, for example, in Miami, you know, as a local brand. So, you know, any idea of that will be great.
I mean, living wages, you know, has to be one of the key issues. You know, if we're just picking one, you know, making sure you're paying living wages to everybody working, that's got to be, another one of those elephants in the room, because brands are talking about their commitment to pay living wages, but most brands aren't talking about what they're doing. You know, they don't know when they're going to be able to pay a living wage, and they're not measuring their results. And so, you know, if you can pay living wages to your workers, I think, you know, that is the best thing you can do. Do that and shout about it.
And another thing, also, like to the consumer, like for consumer education, like what would be something so that we, with our petition or something where we can have the community involved, be involved in this? I don't know if...
Yeah, well, on our website we have a huge raft of resources. So we have a Get Involved pack for brands and retailers, also Get Involved for education. In fact, we have a whole educational resources section, so everything from sort of, you know, quizzes, materials from primary school up to university. We have Get Involved for consumers. So, and there's so many resources on the website. There's the reports from the Garment Worker Diaries as well, which are fascinating to read, really in-depth country reports in Bangladesh, Cambodia and India. So if people want to find out more information, there's a lot of materials there, and you can really start to dig down and find out more about the issue. So that's a good place to start.
Thank you. Thank
And
you.
links to other organisations there as well.
Thank you. Yes.
Sorry, good morning. So my question's really about the Fashion Transparency Index. I think it's a really helpful tool. Do you plan on making that methodology public for smaller brands to start off, like emerging designers, to use the methodology and be transparent from the beginning?
It's certainly something I would be interested in doing. We won't put smaller brands into the index. I think just because I've seen, a lot of indices, you look at them and you get a few sustainable brands right at the top, and it tends to sort of skew the results a bit. So at the moment we're saying brands can opt into it, but only if they have over, I think it's £36 million, about $50 million turnover. But we want it to be for big brands. We're going to extend it to 200 brands next year. And not many companies have opted in, but a few of them, like Monsoon Accessorize, have. But I think the methodology itself is really important, and it's one of the things I'm very passionate about doing, getting funding for, is actually using that and turning it into tools and saying, this is the framework, this is what a young brand can do, because it's much easier to start off being transparent. It's much harder to plug it in afterwards. And from when I was in Argentina last year, there was a great demand there from young brands who wanted to be more transparent. So it's certainly something we will look at doing. We're working really closely with the British Council at the moment, and we're going to be doing a range of professional toolkits for young designers, young brands, and those are going to be coming out. I think they're being piloted in the autumn, so they should be available hopefully within the next 12 months as well.
Yes. We need a microphone. Oh, coming. Yes, please.
Hi, Carrie. I'm Colleen Coughlin, part of the Fashion Revolution here in Miami. And I just want to talk about, I know that we as fashion revolutionaries have an idea of where things are coming from, how bad it can be, but how do you keep your spirits up in this, how do you encourage people to continue to do this with still knowing all the facts of how detrimental fashion can be? What is your personal way of keeping the movement going or getting super excited about what's happening?
I think having an amazing team around, we have a fantastic team who is all really supportive, both in the UK and, around the world. We've got Lauren here, who's our country coordinator. We've got the team in Miami. We've got great teams all around the world in all the different countries. And I think we're all, so enthusiastic, so passionate. But also I think seeing change can happen. Going to Bangladesh in November and going to some of the garment factories. Bangladesh now has some of the safest garment factories in the world. It's got something like 5 out of the top dozen sort of green certified factories, and it's going to have more of those coming online in the next few months. So Bangladesh is now a really good place. It's one of the best places in the world, one of the safest places in the world to source garments from for the larger brands. So, that can happen, but we need to see the Bangladesh Accord and Alliance happening in other countries. We need that legislation. We need due diligence, and we need something, a framework which brands will sign up to. So if they're producing in Myanmar or Cambodia or any of the other countries, Ethiopia, that they are held to those same standards as well. Because Rana Plaza happened in Bangladesh, it could just as easily have happened in pretty much any other garment producing country.
Thank you. Kavita, please.
Hi, Carrie. One, congratulations. I think you guys did an amazing job turning a movement, globally. My concern as part of, one of the people that we've, from the beginning, born with transparency, is how do you make sure that what you're doing, the major brands don't turn it into a tool to hide and greenwash, because that's what concerns me the most. I see so many of the big brands using indexes and using all of these, I made my clothes and pictures, and the truth that all of us who work in the industry know is that it's such a small, tiny, superficial part of what they're doing that I feel like in some way it misguides the consumer and makes them believe that, oh, now H&M is, super sustainable because they've got an eco collection or they've got photos that say, I made your clothes. So how do we make sure that this real revolution that we started doesn't get taken over by the big guys and used, as many have been done in the past, and we don't really make change happen?
Yep. I think that's why I always emphasise that transparency is not the end game. Transparency is about public disclosure. And we can't start to address these issues, we can't start to fix these issues until we have public disclosure. And we can't make judgment calls on what that disclosure is. And so, you know, for me, I find it really hard when I'm doing the research that I have to give somebody the same points if they have a policy which is 2 lines, or if they have a policy, you know, like Topshop, who has 4 pages of, you know, four book manual for their suppliers, which gives all the policies and, you know, best practice, how you should put these policies into practice, but they get the same score. But we can't give a judgment call on that. You know, we are scoring people on their transparency. And, you know, I think a lot of people didn't realise that. A lot of people are sort of thinking that, you know, transparency is about the brand's sustainability, about their ethics. It really has nothing to do with that. It's about the disclosure, and then that disclosure will mean that we're better able to see, you know, whether those policies are actually making a difference, whether they are driving change. And I think, you know, that comes around to what you're saying. Then we know if they're greenwashing, because if they have a lot of, you know, lovely commitments on their website, which a lot of them do, but you're not actually seeing impact. You know, what do they do in the no-show fix? How do they address any issues? You know, that's really where the crunch lies. What are they doing? If there's an issue, what are they disclosing about, you know, the ratings of their facilities? So I think, you know, once you drill down into the index, you can see which brands have, you know, some brands scored nearly 100% for their policies. They've got policies on everything, but we need to look at the impact.
So don't you think from social activism point of view, what the young lady was asking who works with you, maybe what we all need to do is just go and not buy those brands and actually promote buying young, small brands that are around us, and that's the message we need to send to the big brands. And once, like you said, they're competitive. So if you hit them where it hurts, which is in business, which when they see their sales go down, maybe they'll wake up and smell the coffee. Maybe the biggest activism that we can do as individuals is stop buying, you know, stuff that we don't know where it's made, or made by, you know, that might be the easiest way out, or the fastest way to make change happen.
I think it is, but I think there will still be a really teeny percentage of people who will make that decision to buy from the small ethical brands. And realistically, those brands are such a tiny percentage of the market, such a fraction of 1%, that they couldn't cope with it if everyone started buying from them. The way to create change is we have to get these big giants to change. I mean, that's the way to change the industry. The average people out, you know, shopping in the high street on Oxford Street in the UK, or, you know, on Fifth Avenue today, you know, they don't realise, they don't know about the issues. We have to get the big chains from the luxury down to the fast fashion to change through consumer pressure. You know, people's jobs rely on this. We've got millions of people working in the fashion industry. And, you know, yes, whilst we want to champion what people are doing, like yourselves, and saying this is best practice and brands should be following this and taking inspiration from this and incorporating this into the work they're doing, we have to get the big players to change as well. And we're very much against boycotting, because we don't think that helps anybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Carrie. It was a pleasure to have you here. Thank you. Big applause, please.